Hey everybody, this is Isa, your host of the Bug Scope. Welcome to this week's special edition. If you're not familiar with the Bug Scope, welcome. Each week I bring you guys on a virtual insect field trip, and some little updates are that, well, first, thanks for hanging tight and sorry for the delayed start here. We had some technical difficulties. If you are over on HAPS, you saw my comment in the chat about how we're having a little bit of a technical difficulty with the VPN where our guest today was broadcasting from. Sometimes when our guests are at governmental institutions, they are not able to broadcast, and we forgot to check that. So sorry about that. And so Dr. Ashley Kennedy is headed back to another location. And so in the meantime, I thought I'd get started to keep you guys in the loop and let you know that that part of today's broadcast will start at 6:30, which gives us some extra time to think of our tick questions for her. Welcome, everybody. Hi, Craig. Hi, Ella. Hi, David. Sorry for the inconvenience as well. I know for some of you over in Europe, means we're starting a little later and it's already somewhat late for you. I do have some exciting news for those of you who follow the Bug Scope regularly, and if you don't already, make sure you come on to HAPS, or if you're on Twitch or on Facebook or YouTube, make sure you click the subscribe button or the follow button to keep in touch. And a couple weeks ago, I was sharing one of my favorite caterpillar species, which it's one that I think of very fondly, the Eastern tent caterpillar. I grew up thinking it was a pest species, only to learn later on that it's a native species to the area. But I have very fond memories of running around the backyard, collecting like 70 of them, and just watching them with my sister. And so I shared that with you several weeks ago, and then they ate and ate and ate, and then they have pupated. And here, I'll move this over for now. But don't worry, this will be a tick broadcast. We're just waiting for our guest to arrive at her other location so the technical difficulties can be resolved. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for your patience. But our little moth friend, our caterpillar friend from the other evening, turned into a moth. So welcome back to the light, little moth. Well, let me blow this off so I can show you our moth friend up close. There's our little moth friend. The adult Eastern tent caterpillar. And let's see how it's doing. I'll get it on my finger. Come here. It looks like it's hanging. Whoops. It's actually flying away. One moment. Whoops, come here. All right. So now it is on my hand and shivering so that it can warm up its flight muscles and fly away. Take off. Has beautiful antennae, very characteristic for its family. But yeah, the Eastern tent caterpillar, which we saw on the Bug Scope a couple weeks ago as a youngin', a little baby caterpillar. And now look at it now, ready to take off and fly into the world. Here, I'll show you a nice picture of its face. It's really has a very cute, fluffy face. Oops, and off it goes. All right. It's going to the window. I'll go get it later. Anyway, so hope you guys are doing well. Hi, Pablo. Jenna's saying Eastern tent caterpillars are how she got into entomology too. They were all over her dad's crab apple tree. Yeah, totally. Like, cheers then, Jenna. That's also what I wrote about when I wrote my personal statement for my Fulbright National Geographic Storytelling Fellowship. So lots of fun memories. Hi, Abel. Hey, Peter and Pablo, good to see you. I was just having an issue earlier with getting my guest online. I think it was the same VPN issue that I had earlier with our parasitoid wasp guest, Miles. But she's moving, so she'll be joining us at 6:30 to start the broadcast. So that gives us now 15 minutes to think about ticks, gather our questions. Do you guys have tick stories of a time that you were bit by a tick? I think one of my earliest memories of ticks has to be when I was out camping with my family. Don't know where exactly because I was like a little kid, but I just remember putting my hand behind my ear and feeling something, a big bump. And then I just remember having ticks behind my ears. Maybe because little kids are a good height, that we walk by the understory brush and they just whoop, latch on. Yeah, how are you guys all doing? Where are you guys tuning in from? Hope you are well. David is saying happy, Howden over in the UK is saying happy 30 days wild month. This may be just a UK thing. It might be because I'm not familiar with it. But I'm guessing that you are broadcasting on it, perhaps. David's also another person who broadcasts on entomology, so go on over and check him out if you enjoy the bug scope. David's saying it would be nice to get some tick avoidance tips. There are apparently lots on a site where I am moth surveying in about a fortnight. So you will get that during today's broadcast. Since today the topic is how to stay safe from them. Each of the 10 things are related to tick avoidance, and because there are a bunch of diseases that I'm sure we'd all much rather not have that ticks can sometimes transmit. Hello from Santo Domingo, says Lucia. Hello. And Jenna is saying hello from Edison. Awesome. Hello from Ann Arbor. That's where I am. Yeah, I am doing well. Thanks, David. I have some news the new dissection scope. So thank you all for the support through the awards you guys have given me on here, through the Super Hearts on Periscope, through Patreon support, and through the GoFundMe. I have a new dissection microscope on the way, so I can return this to the museum and have a dedicated bug scope dissection scope that's going to get here on Friday. So the new one's not here yet. The new one's getting here on Friday. I did a lot of research to pick out what was the right dissection scope. For those of you who are not familiar, for a lot of my broadcasts here on the bug scope, we take a look at an insect and we often will take a much closer look, like 30 times magnification, underneath the dissection scopes. Hence the name, the bug scope. So I'll probably do a broadcast to celebrate that. And I have a cool critter here that I might share this critter with you guys sooner, but a cool beetle to share with you. Beetle larva. Tis summer, the season where there are many, many cool insect encounters. So, and tick encounters, which are not as cool, I suppose. Yeah, so if I miss the ukulele stream, says Blueprinter. I will do some more in the future. Yes. Thanks for letting me know. Good to see you. Yeah, sometimes I do play the ukulele too. And David is saying would be interested in knowing what factors led to your decision on the microscope. Sure, yeah. So initially, I had my sights set on this Leica dissection scope, which is basically the same as the one that I've been using right here, which I used for many broadcasts over the last 3 years to look at caterpillars and all sorts of things. The one I was going to get has built-in Wi-Fi camera. And the more I thought about it, the more there were features that I wanted more control over. So the one that I got, it's different from the Leica Easy. It's different from this one, the Leica Easy 4W, because it's trinocular, so I can add my own DSLR camera, which gives a lot of flexibility as camera technologies change, rather than relying on the integrated camera. That was a really big point for me. So I'd love to be able to take nice, beautiful photos and make it the best quality possible to share with you guys here on the Bug Scope, on Instagram and beyond. Thanks so much for the super heart, David, and thanks as well, Travis, for the Haps hug. Cool. I like that award. Hope you guys are doing well. So we have 10 more minutes about until Ashley is home and will be able to join us. And so what else can we talk about in the meantime? I was trying to decide whether to start the broadcast now, because once I start, I can't stop and restart it to like give you guys the heads up. I can't give you the heads up and then stop it and then come back. But I was like, I can't wait half an hour and leave everybody hanging about what's going on. So, and I can't start up a new broadcast when she arrives because I shared this broadcast link in many different places. So it's tricky. Maybe I need a mailing list or something like that to keep everybody on the same page and updated when things like this come up. So Travis is saying, I'm great. How's your evening going? Pretty well, thanks. David's asking, how long will the moth live for? The moth will probably live for a couple weeks. I don't really know their biology so much. I don't necessarily know if they have mouth parts. I'm guessing that they do. But yeah, I don't know. Jenna, do you know? David says that's something I'd like Haps to change. Yeah, I did mention it to Peter and Pablo, asking them if there's some way to do like an RSVP system. Sort of like what what's it called? Like Eventbrite has. And actually I do. Jenna's saying MailChimp is a great mass email sender. The question, Jenna, is it'd be nice if there was a way to send out notification to keep you guys updated on changes for the broadcast, or like a RSVP system or something like that. That was the comment/question. Yeah. And I don't know, David, for sure, but there are some moths, like the Luna moth, that only live for about 2 weeks. So yeah. I could share, darn, I wish that I could screen share, then I'd share with you guys some periodical cicadas. But all right, I think I'm going to go back though and share this so that anybody who's hopping on now who might be confused and thinking like, where's the tick broadcast, will know that that's still the agenda for the evening. Oh, Jenna's asking, I think the Eastern tent is 1 generation per year. Yeah, I think so too. So I guess the question is, when do they lay their eggs? Because they do overwinter as eggs. Yeah. We have a question from over on Twitch. Hello. Asking, how can I get started learning the origins of words, Isa? It sounds like you're asking a question for an etymologist rather than an entomologist. But a dictionary is a good place to start, I'd say. That's what I turn to, at least. I'm happy to have other people suggest where they get down to the bottom of words in the chat. Yeah. David is saying, the tick and his sidekick moth, Arthur, from the comic books. Not familiar with that. Yeah. Yeah, so I can talk about our guest tonight a little more. So Dr. Ashley Kennedy, when did I first meet her? I think I first met her at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia. Probably there, maybe at the American Entomological Society, even, which is based out of the museum in Philadelphia. And Ashley has been, she got her master's at University of Delaware doing taxonomy on a type of true bug. And then she continued on to do her PhD with Doug Tallamy on researching what birds eat, where she set up camera traps on perches and to see bluebirds as they landed and to identify what was in their mouths. And so they caught a lot of caterpillars and spiders and all sorts of things. And then Ashley went on to do a postdoc at with the US government on ticks. And then now she works on ticks with the state of Delaware. And she can give us a little more details on that as necessary when she hops on soon. But I've seen Ashley around a bunch at national conventions. We happened to be on the same flight during the convention in Vancouver a couple years ago, which was really fun. And yeah, very excited. You can find her on Twitter and also on Twitter if you guys want to follow her as well beyond tonight's broadcast. But she'll probably be joining us in like 5 to 10 minutes. So maybe take a moment now to go get a drink, a beverage, or a snack, or a bathroom break, so you can sit tight, be comfortable when she comes and we start down the list of 10 things that everybody ought to know about how to stay safe from ticks. Yeah, a lot of the people that I bring on the bug scope are people who I have met in person. Not everybody, but most people, I've met them in person. I mean, that's how it used to be on Periscope, where it was only guests that I was in person with. And then now with HAPS, it's opened a whole other world of opportunity to, here, I'm going to actually go like this. It's opened a whole opportunity to bring on people remotely, which is why it was really awesome to bring on Ashley Whiffen, to talk about carry-on beetles a couple months ago. And I was able to bring on Gavin Campbell to talk about his PhD work on studying the arthropods in temporary pools of water, temporary waters. And yeah, it's helpful, especially with COVID, because of social distancing. So very grateful. Uh-oh, David says, number 1 tip, never go outside. No! That's one way. Although if your dog goes out into the backyard, they could bring it inside to you, potentially, the ticks. So yeah, yes, thanks, David. David's saying, yes, these guests you've had here have been great. Thank you. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and I do, it's true, I can't really wait until we can be in person again. I'll take a moment now to share also that tomorrow there's going to be a science roundtable talking about collaboration. David Dunn is going to be a part of that roundtable too. He's a astronomer, a professor of astronomy, and also if you guys like astronomy, make sure you follow him as well. He's been giving really great presentations, really fun. He gives great analogies and demonstrations. So make sure you give him a follow. Check out his awesome presentations here on HAPS. I still need to figure out how to share my screen on HAPS because it doesn't work still for me. Yeah, Travis says this summer the ticks are going to be bad. What gives you that indication, Travis? Yeah, there have been years that have been worse or not as bad than others, and maybe Ashley can shed some light on that too. Yeah. And oh wait, I'm delaying right now because our guest has some technical difficulties. But I wanted to ask you, Georgia, if you don't mind. Will you come in? Do you mind coming over to say hello? Okay. One of my housemates, I live in a house with scientists, so it is helpful during COVID because it means I can have some live guests. Here's Georgia. She's also on HAPS, Georgia Alteri.
Hello.
Yeah, she's a PhD researcher studying evolution and bats, and I don't know how else you want to describe what you study.
Yeah, I'm really interested, especially in like short-term evolution. So like how things are evolving right now in response to the things that we as humans are doing, the new pressures, the new natural, quote unquote, selective forces in the world.
Yeah.
Emergency guest. Yeah, that's right.
Well, I was going to ask you a relevant question, which is, do bats get ticks, and have you seen them?
Do bats get ticks? So
I'm going to sit right here.
Sure.
Okay.
I have not seen our bats here with ticks on them. They have mites sometimes, which are like much smaller, but I haven't seen any with ticks. In the tropics, the bats there have a lot more parasites on them. In fact, there's a really scary, you should look up like bat with like parasite on face. I think it's also not a tick, but it's like something that like goes over the bat's face. Is garlic repellent against tick? This is a question for the next guest. I don't know whether garlic is a useful repellent for ticks.
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to either. We'll save it for Ashley, Dr. Ashley Kennedy, when she hops on, which will be in the next 5 to 10 minutes.
I definitely do think that there's just a difference between different people, like who gets ticks or not, because like my brother always gets ticks. He gets tons of ticks. And I have never had a tick like really embed itself in me before. I've only found them crawling around. And like he goes outside like 5% as much as I do. Like he kind of hates going outside because he gets so many ticks. Like he'll like get them from our backyard and stuff by the woods as kids.
Actually, not talking about those things, I just remembered how I got a ton of chiggers recently, which have been driving me crazy. And I wonder if Ashley studies them too. So lots to discover.
Someone asked, can short life cycle things like insects evolve faster than longer life cycle things like mammals? Yes. So yeah, if you don't control for like the generation time, then that is true, that they're able to evolve more quickly. And then sometimes when you have like, so it can create for interesting dynamics when you have like host parasites and like evolving together. And like supposedly they're both running the same evolutionary race, but the parasites are like evolving. They should be able to evolve more quickly, but there's ways that like the hosts can like supposedly keep up themselves, like sexual reproduction. If the pathogen is just like an asexually reproducing things, sexual reproduction by like mixing up the genetics of different individuals can kind of allow them to evolve faster.
That's an interesting thing to think about too, because oftentimes in those cases, like for me, it would make sense when I'm thinking about it. I don't know a lot on this topic, just to be very clear, but when thinking about it, those parasites have to be really careful because they don't want to completely take down their hosts. So they have to find that sweet balance where it's just enough but not too much.
Yeah. Yeah, a parasite wants the host to stay alive so it can live off of it as long as possible.
Don't let the mothership go down.
Yeah. Travis asks what caves have done research on bats. I don't know, like people often don't really break it down by cave. Like they'll study bats in like a whole region, or like especially like in the tropics, like a lot of caves, maybe any cave has had bat, like every cave has probably had like bat research done on it in some areas, like in Puerto Rico, kind of all the bat caves are pretty studied. So, and here in Michigan, we have not only caves that have research done on bats in them, but also bats will use artificial caves, mines, abandoned mines. They really like here in Michigan. We hardly have any natural caves, and so they have invaded our abandoned iron and copper mines in Michigan.
Or humans have left behind a habitat for them in a way, too.
Yeah,
I wonder if it's affected the populations in a positive way.
Yeah, I bet that there's a lot of species that didn't used to be very well distributed in Michigan, or like used to not really be in this area before that.
Yeah. And sorry, I put my face really close to the mic, so hopefully that. Idly Is that how I say your name? It's a challenge to see the L's and the I's. Anyway, Idly on Twitch is saying on that note, I wonder, well, this is flipping back to the ticks. They're wondering if blood type is pertinent to the tendency to pick up ticks.
Ooh.
So
I bet someone's done a study on that.
Yeah. Any predictions?
Yeah. If people want, they can put in the chat. Put your blood type in the chat and whether you have
blood type
high or low, whether you feel like you get more or fewer ticks than the average person. Yeah.
Georgia's initiating a public, open access to the data study.
Yeah, although you're supposed to get the human research subject approval before you start collecting data from participants. So the data will be void. We can't use it.
Yeah, that's a good question. So my guess is that it probably doesn't matter to the ticks, but I mean, maybe because I really don't know anything about how. I suppose I don't know anything about how blood types might affect the insects that use them. Even with mosquitoes, I'm thinking, I feel like there'd be, Ashley is here.
Hey.
Okay, yay! All right, thanks for popping in, Georgia. All right, the moment we've all been waiting for. Welcome.
I apologize for the technical difficulties. Oh my goodness.
We had no, it's okay. Just to catch you up though, I decided to start broadcasting so that people would know what's going on.
Sure.
So we've covered a bunch of different topics from these caterpillars that have started to close. So I shared that because I had shared the caterpillars a couple weeks ago when they're still, little caterpillars, and now they're becoming adults. And then we had a couple of questions coming in on ticks, which we can address. We'll address in a moment, but first, before we do that, I want to 1 second here. First of all, I'll say, how are you doing, Ashley?
I'm good.
Good.
Flustered by the change in venue last minute.
Right. No, understandable. Yeah. Make sure take a deep breath. Welcome. Great to have you here. I introduced you a little earlier, of course, now that you're here, I want to also introduce you as well. So, all right, here we go. Welcome everybody to 10 things everyone ought to notice to stay about ticks to stay safe with our guest expert, Dr. Ashley Kennedy. Welcome to the Bug Scope. Make sure you heart, say yikes if you want to, if you don't like ticks, as a reaction to this broadcast here in the HAP studio.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So Ashley is the tick biologist for the state of Delaware. She runs the tick surveillance program, collecting ticks all over the state by different methods, both active and passive, and I'm sure she'll explain what that means to us soon. She has her PhD and master's in entomology from the University of Delaware and is a board-certified entomologist. She completed a postdoctoral appointment at the U.S. Army Public Health Center Tick-Borne Disease Laboratory, and she has been interested in ticks since she was a toddler. And first diagnosed with Lyme disease at the age of 3.
That's right. Well, thank you so much for that intro. My job is a lot of fun. I started this role about a year ago. So it's been like a whirlwind of learning how to run a surveillance program for ticks. And you mentioned active and passive surveillance. So the active part's my favorite. I go out into public lands in Delaware, and I brought a prop. I use this tick flag to collect them. So all it is, it's a square meter of white cloth on a wooden dowel. It's very low tech, but it's very effective. And all you have to do is drag that over the vegetation. So sometimes I drag it along the grass, and sometimes I sweep it over higher shrubs and stuff. And the ticks will just naturally grab onto it. So they quest for a host. Quest is a technical term. I know it sounds like something out of Dungeons and Dragons, but they'll have their first pair of legs outstretched, just ready to grab on to a host. And so they mistake that piece of cloth going by for fur or a passing animal, passing host of some sort, and they grab on. So I often will see people when I'm out at the state parks using that flag, tick dragging, and they'll ask me to explain it. And they're always kind of surprised to hear that it's not treated with anything. You don't have to add any special attractant to it. It's just the movement of it over the vegetation that tricks them into grabbing on. And I love it because it's very low impact on other arthropods. You know, you're not going to accidentally get a lot of like bycatch like you might get with a trap of some kind.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of insects that are just waiting to grab onto whatever goes by. Most are running away or dropping to the ground or flying away when something comes by.
Exactly. So that's the active part. I guess another thing that falls under the active category is I will trap animals. So I use these little Sherman traps. They're about this big. They're designed to catch rodents and in a way that does not harm them. So they're live traps and you can release the rodents at the end of it. So I catch them and examine them for ticks. We're going to start a new thing this year where we're taking little samples from the rodents' ears to test them for tick-borne pathogens. Just a teeny little like 2 millimeter sample of their ear skin. It doesn't even make them take it. Yeah. And then when it's hunting season, I go to hunter check stations. And so people are bringing in their deer, or we hope to resume this with turkeys too, although COVID kind of like threw a wrench in everything. So we didn't do in-person turkey check stations this year or last year, but maybe next year. And I look at the, freshly killed game to see what kind of ticks they've collected. So all of those things fall under the umbrella of active surveillance. So things that I'm like, actively doing to find ticks. And that's just to give an idea of, what ticks do we have in Delaware? When and where do they occur? Like when is their density the highest? So, both presence, absence, but also like overall numbers and their phenology, their seasonality, for the different life cycle stages and the different species. So each species has its own pattern that it follows. And then under passive surveillance, we have a bunch of participating veterinary clinics and a couple of wildlife rehab centers and some farms, stables, other places that have to do with animals that might encounter ticks, and then they submit to us tick samples. And so it's passive because it's more just like I'm waiting for that data to come to me, waiting for those samples to come to me. So it's kind of like crowdsourced from a whole team of people across the state. And sometimes people give me ticks they've collected off of themselves too. So that's all passive surveillance. And yeah, we're using that information to try and figure out like, where do we have particular tick problems that we might need to take some kind of management action to control. Although at this point, since it's such a new program, we're just focused on surveillance. So control will be something we tackle down the road.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. Here, Travis is asking, what's the most common type of tick?
Okay, so
in general, I guess, because that's interesting depending on where you live or where you are in the world, I suppose. So then maybe what you come across in your...
Yeah, I have a couple different answers. So I know that one of the most broadly distributed ticks in the whole world is the brown dog tick. The scientific name is Rhipicephalus sanguineus, because it's native to, I want to say like the Mediterranean region, like Northern Africa. But it has spread all over the world through like the movement of animals. It is kind of a specialist on dogs, although it will feed on other things. So it has been found in all 50 states, and I think like pretty much like every country where people are.
Is that the American dog tick?
That's different from the American dog tick.
It's just not this.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take it off the screen so there's no confusion.
Cool. And then even though it's so widespread, it's not the most commonly encountered. So maybe that wasn't a great answer for your question. For Delaware, the most commonly encountered tick is the Lone Star tick, Amblyomma americanum. And I saw you had a picture of that one up just a moment ago. It's got
bring it back.
dot right in the middle. Yeah, so that's why it's called the Lone Star tick. People sometimes think it has to do with the great state of Texas, but it's really just because of that distinguishing feature. Only the females have that, though. So if you get a male, it's a little bit harder to identify.
While we have it up on the screen, could you tell us what makes a tick a tick?
Sure.
What's the definition of a tick?
So ticks are, they belong to the order Exodida. And most of the ticks that you'll see are in the family Exodidae. Although there are also a couple other families that are less commonly encountered. So ticks, they are arachnids. I know you've talked about spiders a lot on the bug scope. So
True.
yeah, just like spiders, they have 8 legs and they have 2 major body parts, 2 tegmata. So that's the class that they belong to. And then the subclass, so moving one step down the ladder of their hierarchy, their taxonomic hierarchy, they're, along with all the other mites, they belong to the subclass Acari. And so ticks are actually mites. They just happen to be particularly large mites that are easy to see.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. And so pretty much, the majority of ticks that are of public health importance, so the ones that are most likely to find you, so they belong to the family Exodidae, which is the hard ticks. And if you've ever been bitten by a tick, like they are hard, like they've got this tough exoskeleton and it makes it hard to like squish a tick to death. So generally, if you found a tick on yourself, you can't just like squish it the way you might with some types of insects, although you shouldn't do that with insects. I know this audience doesn't need to hear that. So there's this other family of ticks that are kind of cool and weird. I've just recently started to learn more about them, and they're the soft ticks, Argacidae, and they have a totally different life history, different strategies for finding a host. So they won't be out in the vegetation questing for a host with their legs outstretched the way that a hard tick would be. They live like directly in the nests with their hosts. So they're usually associated with birds and bats. And they've got some, physical differences you can use to tell them apart, and also behavioral, ecological differences too. I see a question coming in. Are all ticks blood feeders? And they are. All of them are hematophagus arthropods.
Hematophagus.
Yeah.
Heme referring to the blood and the phagus referring to the eating.
Yeah. And
like entomophagy,
eating
the eating of bugs. Ento referring to the bugs and phagy referring to the eating.
And then there's another great question also from David. Is it both sexes or just females, as with mosquitoes? So in ticks, it is both sexes, and that's I've had to do some like myth busting on that, because I've even found like pamphlets and other printed sources that say that you only have to worry about the females, but that's not true. I think I pulled a male tick off of myself yesterday or the day before. So the females do feed more. So if you see a tick that has really engorged with blood and it's like swollen to many times its original size, and looks like a plump grape that's ready to pop, super gross. Those are the females, because they have like the sac-like part of their body that can really distend with blood, and that gives them the protein that they need to lay eggs. The males don't get anywhere near that full. But they do still need, at least a little snack of a blood meal.
Is that the easiest way to tell between a male and a female?
The easiest way is if you're looking at them, looking at their back, so looking at them kind of like top down, there's a shield on their back called the scutum. And in males, it's hard to make out because it's actually like the whole back of it is the scutum. And then in females, it only covers the first half because that allows the softer half to distend with blood. So this is a female tick in this picture, and you can kind of make out it's like almost like a V shape on the back.
Yeah.
Like a U shape.
Are there two sort of plates there? Where there's the lower circle area, which is a separate.
Right. Yeah. So the lower part is.
Oh. I think we lost Ashley for a moment, unless it's just me. Oh no. Okay. Hopefully she'll pop right back. I'll bring up this other photo of another tick, and we can guess if this other tick is a male or a female, and then hopefully when Ashley gets back, she can tell us if we are right. Yes, come back, Ashley. Yes, the suspense. So it says she's connected. Here we are. She's back.
Sorry. Yeah, this is not my day for the internet.
Right. It's giving us a cliffhanger, so we can really think and absorb the message you're giving us about the difference between a male and a female tick.
Yeah. So you can see in this one, it is a female because the scutum, or that shield that only covers the first half of it, and then that brown part could really extend with blood.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. Let's see. And then I'm going to share the other picture while we're at it too, so we can see.
Another female.
All right. Yeah, I guess we all have all females here. Cool. Hello, Rodman. Welcome to the broadcast. Cool. Cool. Anyone have any other questions about what makes a tick a tick? We will start into our 10 things. How about that? And what I did do for this is I put together these notifers, so we can go one by one.
Cool.
And I'll push them to the program. So if you look at the screen here, Ashley, you'll see number 1 pop on there. And so we can read it out loud, and then, yeah.
All right. So ticks are active year-round. You might have heard of tick season. People refer to late spring, early summer as tick season because that is when you're most likely to encounter one. But really, you could be bitten any time of year, even in the middle of winter. Some species and some life cycle stages are still active in the middle of winter. I went collecting one day in January when there was snow on the ground, and I didn't even expect to get any, and I wound up collecting 64 ticks that day.
Wow. But are they less likely to latch on to you then, or not necessarily? Because there's less vegetation that's up.
No, the ones I collected, they were out questing for a host, just like the ones this time of year. It's just by the sheer numbers, there are more out and about in the late spring and early summer. And this time of year you might have heard that May was Lyme Disease Awareness Month, and that's because in this part of the world, at least in Eastern North America, the main vector for Lyme disease, Ixodes scapularis, it's in its nymphal stage, and they're most active in May and June, and that's the stage that's most likely to infect someone with the pathogen that causes Lyme disease. Yeah, that's Ixodes scapularis. Again, that's a female. And the adults can also infect you. They can pass on that pathogen. The reason that more people are infected by the nymphs is that the nymphs are so small and hard to see that often they go, I'm sorry, that's my cat's tail in the way. Sometimes they go encrypted. The adults are a little bit easier to spot and remove before they've had time to transmit that pathogen.
Cool. Thank you. What are there? So there's more in the warmer seasons because I'm gonna mute you while I ask my question to help with any echo. So I'm asking. There's more during the warmer seasons because they can be more active and their metabolism is higher and there's more food available.
So it has to do with their 2-year life cycle. So this is the time of in the winter, it's in this part of the world, the only tick that bites humans that's like really active in the winter is Ixodes scapularis, the black-legged tick, and only the adults. But then The nymphs come out in the spring. I think the nymphs are a little bit more sensitive to the cold, so they can't be out during the winter. And then later in the summer, you'll get the larvae, and they come out in huge numbers. Most larvae won't survive to make it to their next life cycle stage. So you'll see, the population declines a little bit as they go from, eggs to larvae to nymphs to adults. I've heard people refer to tick bombs, like when you get a whole mass, like an aggregation of larvae all in one spot. So, maybe having just hatched out of their eggs.
Okay, cool. I wonder if if there's been much research done on like the ability, like their, I guess, their, what's it called? Their antifreeze. That's what I'm looking for. Because they must have some good antifreeze if they're able to be so active in the winter.
So, yeah, the adult black-legged ticks, they'll only come out on days when it's above freezing. So that day that there was snow on the ground, like it was above freezing, just barely, but enough for them to get out. And the rest of the time, they'll be kind of hunkered down in the leaf litter because they want to stay not just where it's warmer, but also where it's humid, because they're even more sensitive to dryness, to desiccation, than they are to changes in temperature.
Okay, interesting.
So that's the main limiting factor. Yeah.
Cool. All right, shall we go on to number 2?
Sure.
All right, cool. Here we go. All right.
All right, so not all ticks are equally dangerous. So each species and each life stage is associated with different risks. And that's why tick identification is so important. So if you find a tick on you, I tell people to save it. I know some people just want to flick it away, flush it down the toilet, or just be done with it as soon as possible. But I recommend to people to hang on to it at least for a little while. Then there's different ways to do that. You can like stick it in the freezer. You can tape it to an index card. You could put it in a little vial of alcohol. But it's important to know what kind of tick bit you, because each species is associated with different risks. The most famous one, of course, is this one up on the screen that's associated with Lyme disease. And I've often encountered people who, when they find out that the tick that bit them isn't the black-legged tick, or some people call it the deer tick. So when people find out it was something else, they think like, oh, okay, like I'm home free. I don't have to worry about Lyme disease. But really, like there's many other things that it could be, that it could be carrying. So,
Cool.
And
so
I mentioned life cycle stage.
Sorry, go ahead. Does that lead us to number 3? Is what I was wondering.
Oh yeah.
Shall I bring that one up?
Sure.
Okay. Number 3.
Yeah. So Lyme disease may be the most common tick-borne infection, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. So ticks have been found to vector everything from viruses to bacteria to protozoan parasites, which is kind of like if you think of the causative agent of malaria, that's a protozoan parasite. And even nematodes, although luckily in my part of the world, I don't have to worry about nematodes. But this species that's here on the screen, Ixodes scapularis, it's been associated with Powassan virus, which is can be very serious and even fatal illness. Lyme disease is a bacterial one. Rocky Mountain spotted fever is a rickettsial bacterial illness that's associated with the dog tick. The deer tick or black-legged tick can also give you the causative agent of babesiosis, which is a protozoan parasite. So, and one reason that that's important is I know there are a lot of healthcare providers who, when they hear you've been bitten by a tick, they'll agree to prescribe antibiotics. But keep in mind that antibiotics aren't going to be effective against all those different kinds of agents. So if you have a virus or if you have a a protozoan parasite, you would need a different course of action. So it is true that most infections associated with ticks could be knocked out by, doxycycline or another antibiotic, but not everything.
Cool. And talking about what happens with those diseases, shall we go on to number 4?
Sure. I just noticed that David is already on the right track there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So ticks can even make you allergic to meat. And it's a little bit different from the other diseases that I've mentioned because it's not a disease caused by infection with a pathogen, but some people develop an allergic reaction after they've been bitten by a tick. So the tick bite is like a sensitizing event that makes them sensitive to future ingestion of mammalian meat products. So some people call it the red meat allergy, but even white meat, even pork can induce the same effects. So really anything that's associated with mammals, even dairy products and even products that contain gelatin or other meat byproducts can induce this allergy. And so I've met patients with this syndrome, it's called alpha-gal syndrome, who say that it really, really impacted their lives because it wasn't as simple as just cutting out meat. Sometimes they had to do some detective work and figure out what other types of products were making them sick. And unlike most food allergies where you have a pretty much instantaneous reaction, sometimes the results are delayed for hours and hours. So it can be hard to connect the dots and figure out what it was that made you sick. And then, it's also, the diagnosis is complicated because often, the patient is someone who used to eat meat all the time, and they might have eaten it hundreds and hundreds of times in their life before. But then what happens, and I'm not an expert on this, but I'll try and give my best summary of what goes on with this syndrome. So the tick, if it is previously fed on a mammal, it might have trace amounts of this carbohydrate called alpha-gal in its salivary glands, kind of left over from that earlier blood meal that it took. And then that alpha-gal gets injected into your bloodstream when the tick feeds on you. And your body may have encountered alpha-gal many times before through your diet, through your digestive system. But when it shows up in an unexpected place in the bloodstream, then your immune system doesn't recognize it and thinks it's some new invader, and you've got to launch an immune reaction to get rid of it. So, and then from that point on, meat or other products can trigger that allergy. And this is associated with the Lone Star ticks. That's the one that had that white dot on the female's back.
I'll bring that back so we can take a look.
Mm-hmm. And it can be very serious. And for some people, it might just be gastrointestinal upset, but it can even can have effects all the way up to anaphylactic shock, which can be fatal. So really unpleasant and really serious illness.
Yeah. All the more reason to save that tick if you find it on you. That way it can help you narrow down what your weird, random allergic reaction is that you might be happening. It might really help with that. And thinking about that too, Ashley, what you were saying about sometimes it's not just the meat itself, but other things as well, makes me wonder about recently I learned from Deanna, actually a cosmologist here on HAPS, how white sugar isn't necessarily vegan, or because they use bone, charred bone, to help make it white. And so I'm maybe to people who are extra sensitive, I wonder if they might react to that even. But
wow, yeah, I hadn't considered that. Wow.
Yeah, I know one person who's had this illness from ticks, and that's Susan Finkbeiner, who's an entomologist.
Mm-hmm.
Who, do you know? Are you familiar with her?
No.
Okay, she's a lepidopterist. She was a couple of years above me in undergrad, so that's how I know her. And she's the first person who I heard about this from, and I was like, "What? Is that real?" And she's like, "Yeah, a lot of people don't believe it when I say it, but
well, yeah." yeah, it's when it was first described, I'm sure a lot of people were skeptical about it, but it's been over a decade now. It's been like pretty well substantiated by various studies. And
Yeah.
for anyone who might have this and is looking for like a gleam of hope, I have at least heard some reports that symptoms can improve with time. So they don't really have a cure for it per se, but some people have been able to slowly reintroduce meat back into their diet. And I always remind people that at least the meat alternative products are getting better all the time. You know, they're getting more convincing if you really miss, you know, having a hearty burger. You know, compared to like 5 or 10 years ago, the veggie burgers today have really improved.
Yeah, like the Impossible Burgers, for example. My sister, who's vegan, we ordered one at a pub in Philly, and she like freaked out at first because wasn't sure if they messed up in the kitchen and it was real or not. But we did figure it out, and it was okay, all clear. But yeah, I think I heard from Susan kind of what you were saying, or I think you were saying how it can go away over time, and it sounded like from her that like if she stopped eating meat, then it'd go away sooner, but sometimes she can't help it but have a little bit, and then it's not helpful for it going away in the long run. But I don't know exactly so much about that. Cool. Yeah, I guess a lot to learn still there. Oh, here we go. Julie says, hi from Australia. My husband has alpha-gal. How long has your husband had it for? Out of curiosity.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, that's like, I'm sure it can be really tough, like to completely have to change a diet for some people who are so used to eating meat regularly. And yeah, cool. So Ashley, shall we go to
Sure.
number, where are we? 5. The good news. Woohoo! The upturn in our journey from 1 to 10 on how to stay safe from ticks.
Okay. Yeah, so you can greatly reduce your chances of getting a tick bite. And I have just a few methods here. There's more common sense approaches too that you've probably heard before. So one thing you can do is apply tick repellent. So some products are meant to be applied directly to your skin. Some are meant to be applied to your clothing. And so there's a few CDC approved active ingredients for both categories. So if you're applying to your skin, you know, you might want to use DEET. That's one of the CDC approved ones. Or if you want like a more natural approach, CDC has also approved oil of lemon eucalyptus. And if you're applying to your clothing, the go-to is permethrin. My only caveat there is that cats can be sensitive to permethrin, so you wouldn't want your cat to come into contact with any treated clothing or shoes. So that's one thing you can do. And when you go out into tick habitat, which I realize tick habitat is this very like amorphous concept, because we used to think of ticks as just being like deep in the woods, and I think we've realized that we need to change that messaging, because they can be in grasslands, and they can even be in your yard, and so, you know, tick habitat might be a broader term than what people visualize it as. But anyways, when you go outdoors, try and stick to paths, like to the middle of paths where your legs won't be brushing up against vegetation, because that's going to be, again, where the ticks are questing for a host with their legs out. So if you don't directly contact the grass or the vegetation, they can't get to you. And what else can you do? Let me see. One of the most important things is to do frequent tick checks. So just constantly be checking, and you got to check like all your nooks and crannies. So it helps if you have either a partner or even just like a handheld mirror to help you look everywhere, because, you know, they like dark places. And so yeah, you want to be really thorough.
We have a couple of questions in the chat about other types of things that may or may not be effective for ticks. For example, 2 Scoops is saying someone on TikTok said to use peppermint. Is that real or just another trick I fell for?
It might have some tick repellent ability, but I don't think it's on the list of CDC approved ones that are the most effective. So
Cool.
might be better than nothing, but not the best you could do.
I see. Thanks. Yeah. Well, one thing you can do, shall we go to number 6?
Sure.
Make your yard tick safe, which you touched upon a little bit, but
Right. So you can make your yard tick safe. So yeah, even your yard could be tick habitat, but it doesn't have to be. So I said you can use a few key landscaping changes, and I specified in the areas where you recreate. So the areas where maybe your kids are playing on a swing set, or maybe where you have friends over for a barbecue, or where you want to be like playing fetch with your dog, whatever. And the reason I'm clarifying that is, I am an entomologist. I love all insects, and I wouldn't want to apply like tick-safe preventive measures to my whole yard, because that would eliminate a lot of valuable habitat for other beneficial arthropods. So,
yeah. And I have to say that Ashley is acutely aware of the importance of having good habitat in the yard for different animals, since her PhD was done on seeing what bluebirds eat, and under the guidance of Doug Tallamy, who's a huge proponent of gardening for wildlife. So
Right. And so when I first kind of switched over to working on ticks, I was worried that some of the things you hear about tick management were at odds with what you hear about arthropod conservation, because you often hear you want to keep your grass short to control ticks. You want to remove all your brush piles and leaf piles and such. And so the way that I kind of make these two things work is, I acknowledge that I don't need to physically be in every square foot of my yard. So I have some areas that are like tick safe areas, and I have others that I'm letting be more of like a wild, more natural area to provide habitat for the arthropods that I do like. So I definitely do have ticks in my yard, but I try and have, some areas where I feel like I can safely garden and so forth, and not have to worry about them. And there's measures about like keeping the grass short and removing brush. They're all about creating, a micro habitat that's not conducive or suitable for tick survival. And again, they're really sensitive to dryness or desiccation. So if you're allowing the sunlight to hit the ground, basically that's going to warm up and dry out the area to a point where it's not comfortable for the ticks to be there. But yeah, I wouldn't want, to make my yard truly tick safe, I'd probably have to like pave the whole thing over and cement, and I don't want to do that for obvious reasons. So
yeah, and it sounds like there are a good amount of preventative measures too when it comes to putting permethrin or other deterrents on your body before going out, and then also doing a thorough tick check, because we're so lucky that they are visible to the naked eye, as opposed to chiggers.
Right.
Which I got this past week, and I'm itching like crazy. All right. There are a couple more questions that were added here, Ashley, if you want to address some of them, like
Oh, sure.
another problem, like what are early symptoms if you were bitten?
Oh, that's a great question. So one rule of thumb is that if you get flu-like symptoms and it's not flu season, that can be an indication of a tick-borne disease, because a lot of them have similar symptoms. So, aches and pains and fever. And so especially if you're getting those types of flu-like symptoms and it's like May or June, you want to consider that you might have been bitten by a tick. And then there's the famous Lyme disease rash. It's kind of like the bullseye rash. But I want to highlight that, not all patients get that rash. And then the rash can look very, very different on different patients. So it's not always like the picture perfect one that they use in public health messaging. It's not always like a perfect red ring with a red dot in the middle. Sometimes Well, actually, CDC has a great page that gives examples of what it might look like, and also shows how it might look on different skin tones, because that can make a big difference too. It's a pet peeve of mine that almost all of the Lyme disease messaging I see uses pictures of Caucasian patients, people with very pale skin, where it's very easy to see that rash. So it can be much harder to see on darker skin, and it could look totally different.
Um, are you willing to share your experience with Lyme disease?
Sure.
We can save it for later too. It's up to you. Yeah.
So I don't remember it firsthand from the first onset because I was just 3 years old, but my mom found a bullseye rash on my leg, and she took me to a pediatrician, and he was very excited because he had just read about Lyme disease for the first time. So, this was a long time ago, before it was like a household name that everybody knew. And I've been told I was probably in the first like 10 cases for my county where I was.
Wow.
And he was able to diagnose it correctly. He was like, I just read about this. I know that this is Lyme disease. But then the next step of treating it appropriately, he did not take, because at that time, kind of the prevailing wisdom was that you couldn't use doxycycline on children under 7 or somewhere around there. And I mean, that might still be true, but I think now we have other antibiotic options that you could use for small children. So he basically had told my parents, like, don't worry about it, just wait a few days and like the fever will go down and the rash will go away. And so it did. The fever went away and the rash went away. But I did have arthritis. I still have arthritis today. It stayed with me these whole past more than 30 years. So, and that was really what got me interested in ticks, because I was like, man, this tiny little arthropod that bit me so long ago, I don't even remember it, has had like this lifelong impact on me.
Wow, yeah. That is pretty wild. Yeah. Yeah. Is that partially how you ended up, going studying ticks, or getting into where you are today? Okay. On your mind.
What
Cool.
really made up my mind to go into medical entomology was in 2007, I was really lucky to do like a study abroad program in Kenya, and I got malaria when I was there. And I was like, man, this makes twice that the arthropods have tried to do me in. So
Oh, yeah.
And then I was researching malaria after I had it, just out of curiosity, and it actually gave me a lot of empathy for the mosquitoes, if you can believe it, because I realized like they're not really it's not really their fault. And I read this article that showed that mosquitoes are more likely to die. They die sooner if they've been infected by the protozoan that causes malaria.
Oh, wow.
Because it changes their behavior. It makes them seek out more hosts and like bite more, so that the parasite can spread. So they're more likely to be swatted and killed because they're not being as cautious as they would under normal circumstances. And I thought, like, wow, so the mosquitoes and I are both victims here.
Totally. Yeah, I'm glad that you're okay from all of that, and I'm sorry that you've had to deal with the consequences of the ticks. In learning about it, is there anything similar with ticks when it comes to the diseases with ticks, or not really?
Oh, as far as if infection with the pathogen changes their life expectancy, offhand, I don't know, because I feel like I've read kind of conflicting things on that. Like, I'm trying to remember if they're associated with like a longer. I don't remember. Maybe someone can say in the chat if they're if they know, because I just can't remember.
Oh, yeah. Cool. Yeah. I have said it on the bug scope before, where I'm like, it's not the mosquitoes' fault, because they were just chosen and hijacked. And then I didn't realize, as you were saying, that how malaria also changes their behavior beyond just the fact that they're hijacked. So that's, yeah, really interesting. Yeah, Lyme disease is just like, to me, is like a very sort of mysterious disease for
Mhm.
different reasons, because it affects people in different ways too, right? Kind of
Absolutely.
shows up in different ways. It just seems
Yeah.
so like amorphous in my
Yeah.
mind.
And there's a lot of confusion around it. It can be everything from, an acute mild illness. Some people have been able to beat it even without antibiotics, like if they just have a strong immune system. And then at the other end of the spectrum, people who don't get adequate or timely treatment for it might have complications that are, much more serious and long lasting.
Yeah.
And there's not really a strong medical consensus on there's different terminology for patients who have symptoms of Lyme disease for years and years. The CDC recognizes what they call post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome, which acknowledges that some people are still feeling symptoms after they've completed what should have been a normal, effective course of treatment. But the CDC does not acknowledge what Lyme advocates would call chronic Lyme disease, which they believe is like an active, persistent, ongoing infection. So, and I am not a medical doctor, of course, and I don't know I don't know what's going on there any more than anyone else. I've read hypotheses that maybe the initial onset, the initial infection maybe triggers some kind of autoimmune disorder that could be more long lasting even after the infection is gone. So that's one possible explanation. I've read another hypothesis about the bacteria might be able to enter this cyst form where they can basically evade the antibiotics and then like come out when it's all clear. And so maybe it is
Wow.
so anyways, that's all like way out of my wheelhouse. I only really know about like tick ecology and not what's going on medically. And just as for my personal experience, I know that I have always had arthritis and I've always attributed it to my Lyme disease infection, but I'm not going to swear that they're connected. Maybe later I'll find out they were unrelated. So it's out of my wheelhouse.
Yeah, definitely super tricky. I don't know about Margaret is asking how long do you have to take the doxycycline?
So yeah, I mean, definitely talk to a medical provider. I think a 2-week course is kind of standard. I've read arguments for a shorter course being effective too. I don't think you need to go longer than 2 weeks. And there are some healthcare providers who will advocate for long-term antibiotic treatment. I think that's like pretty dangerous. Like that's a slippery slope I wouldn't want to go down because the longer you're on them, the more complications that can arise. And there haven't been any robust studies that show that patients who were on long-term antibiotics ultimately got any better than those who just had a short course.
Oh, thanks. Let's go on to number 7, which is kind of a funny one. Number 7 is pushing it to the program now.
So ticks don't jump and they don't fall out of trees. I just wanted to throw that out there as like a myth buster because I hear that all the time. I think what happens is people will find ticks on their head, and so they imagine that it must have dropped down from above, or maybe they find it like, on their back or something. But what actually happens is that they have to quest for a host. They have to come into contact with the host, which they're usually doing at like the level of your leg. I mean, maybe if you were gardening and your head actually touched up against some plants, they could latch directly onto your head. But usually they're going to grab low down, close to the ground, and then climb up. So that they physiologically like don't have the mechanism to jump, and they can't climb all the way up to the top of a tree. They like to stay low to the ground because they need the humidity of the leaf litter
Mm,
Waste.
cool. Yeah, those legs do not just I guess they just look grabby or something. Just if you look at the picture at the top there.
Yeah. And in
Um,
particular, the American dog tick has like a real penchant for climbing up to people's heads. So that one, but when I've been bitten on the head, it's almost always that species. And so I think that one in particular is contributing to this myth that they fall on us from up above.
yeah. Yeah. I was sharing earlier how it was the dog tick that I'd get like behind my ears as a kid when out
Mm.
hiking or on vacation with family. All right. Shall we go to number 8?
Sure.
Number 8 is here we go.
So if you get bitten by a tick, it's important to remove it as soon as possible because the longer it's attached, the more likely it is to transmit pathogens. So there's good news here. It's like even if you get bitten, you're still you're still in the odds are still in your favor is what I should say. So for starters, not every tick is infected. So you might have been bitten by a totally clean tick. And then secondly, even if it is infected with some kind of pathogen, it takes a while for that pathogen to get from the tick into you. So for the causative agent of Lyme disease, we think on average it takes about 24 to 36 hours. So it's not impossible that it could be transmitted sooner than that. But the longer the longer it's attached, the more likely it is for that pathogen to be transmitted. So the only kind of exception for our part of the world, and then so sorry, my knowledge is like very restricted to like Eastern North America.
Oh, good. That's how it works regularly on the bug scope anyway.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm glad people are under.
East Coast bias.
Yeah. Powassan virus can be transmitted much faster. There's evidence that it can be transmitted in as little as 15 minutes of attachment. So that one's pretty scary. So yeah, the sooner you remove the tick, the better. I've encountered people who they'll get a tick on themselves and then like they schedule an appointment with their doctor so their doctor can remove it. And I one time went to the doctor and asked to get a prescription for antibiotics. And I showed him the tick I had pulled off my head, and he said, like, "Oh, like why did you remove it? You should have come here and let me remove it." And I was so appalled by that because, like, no, I'm not gonna wait. I'm not gonna have that tick on my head like not for one moment longer than it absolutely has to be there.
Totally. Yeah.
So, the doctor's not really going to do anything differently from what you can just do at home. So, you don't need any fancy tools to remove it. I mean, I know there are some products that are specifically marketed for this, but the CDC recommends just, a good old-fashioned pair of tweezers, forceps, and then you want to grab the tick as close to your skin as possible, and you want to pull it slowly and gently because you don't want it to break off. So you try not to twist it and try not to jerk it. If you do accidentally break it and you can tell that part of it is still in your skin, that's not the end of the world either. It's kind of just like having a splinter in your skin. So you want to try and get it out with a tweezer, with tweezers. Because it can open up the possibility of like a secondary infection just because you've got like a little open wound there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're at any increased risk of a tick-borne disease, a tick-borne pathogen being transmitted.
Cool. Yeah, it's interesting to me how like with mosquitoes, they're not on you for that long when they transmit. I'm guessing like it's probably only like maybe even less than a minute is my guess. And then with ticks, it takes like over 10 minutes for the disease to transfer. It's interesting. And I guess we're lucky about that too. Oh no, we lost Ashley a little bit again, but she hopefully will bounce back.
Can you hear
Okay,
me?
there you are. There you are.
Yeah. So I do think it has to do with where the pathogen is in the arthropod's body. So if the bacteria or whatever the infectious agent is, if it's hanging out like all the way deep in the tick's midgut, then it's got to like slowly migrate from the midgut up to the salivary glands and then from there into the bloodstream. Whereas mosquitoes, if I'm not mistaken, I think a lot of their pathogens are already hanging out like right at the salivary gland, so they're just like that much closer.
I see. That would explain it. Yeah, I didn't think about that. Cool. All right, let's go to the next one. Number
Thanks, Autumn.
9. Oh yeah, Autumn is throwing her knowledge here, I'm guessing.
I know.
Saying in the salivary glands. Yes. Thank you. Okay. So now we're on to number 9, which is pushing to the program.
So if you do get bitten by a tick, most tick-borne infections can be easily treated, but it's important to seek treatment early and stick to it. So I guess I kind of touched on this already, but it's important to get timely treatment. And for example, if your doctor prescribes antibiotics, you really want to finish that course. So don't stop taking them just because you started to feel better. So for Lyme disease in particular, which is the most common tick-borne infection in North America and the one I have the most experience with and knowledge about, we know that there can be lingering symptoms that can lead to all kinds of complications if you don't get that timely treatment.
I wanted to jump back a little bit to
Sure.
reference the comments, and I don't know if you want to add any notes about that yourself, Ashley. This is where our eastern coast of the USA bias comes in.
Oh, Julie's comment. Okay,
So
Tweezers are yeah.
I'll present it on the screen for people who are watching on other platforms.
Cool.
The comment from Julie. Have you heard of that, Ashley?
I know very little about Australian ticks, so
Okay.
I had not heard this, but
yeah, I'll read it out loud for anybody. Yeah. So Julie Ann is saying that tweezers are not recommended for the Australian paralysis tick. The toxin may be deadly if squeezed with tweezers. She has suffered from tick paralysis and many pets die from it. So if you are in Australia, this is the asterisk for that. Check the local guidelines for these things. How about that? The local CDC or whatever the equivalent is in Australia.
Wow. Yeah, tick paralysis is a really interesting condition that I guess I haven't mentioned yet. It's another condition associated with ticks that's not caused by a pathogen per se. It's like a reaction to the tick's saliva, and it's really interesting because it can be severe, it can be fatal because it causes this ascending paralysis. So starting from the bite site, the paralysis just spreads upward through the body from there. And so if it gets all the way up to, the muscles that you use for breathing, then you can't breathe and you can die. However, if you find the tick and remove it, then everything reverses and you can go back to normal and have a complete full recovery. So I don't personally know anyone who's had that. I think maybe it used to be more common than it is today, at least in North America, which is again where all my knowledge is from. I do know in birds it's more common. I've been reading a lot lately about a particular tick species that parasitizes birds and can make them paralyzed.
Oh, yikes. Yeah, so it's not just, I'll throw in a bonus point that not just humans are affected by ticks.
That's right.
Yeah.
And actually, that leads to number 10.
It does indeed. Here we go.
So don't forget to keep your pets safe from ticks too. And I'm not a veterinarian, but I am a proud pet owner. I have 2 dogs and 3 cats, and it is a challenge to keep my dogs safe from ticks. Cats are easy because I just keep them inside, but my dogs, I keep up to date on tick preventative, and I've found that it's not always 100% effective. I'll still pull ticks off of my dogs sometimes. But yeah, you should talk to your vet about what are the best products to use for whatever pet species you have. One important note is that not all products can be used for all animals. So if you have a product that was designed specifically for dogs, you wouldn't want to put it on your cats because some components can be deadly to cats. And then just like you're supposed to check yourself for ticks, you also want to be checking your pets for ticks regularly too. So, and if I can do it with my big fluffy dogs, you can do it. I'm sure I've got some of the fluffiest dogs you've ever seen.
Do you often get people submitting ticks and from their pets at your office?
Actually. So I had wanted to do this broadcast from my office, and then the internet didn't work. But on my way out, I just grabbed the first box of ticks that I saw. So I have a vial here. This is 37 ticks that came off of one dog as part of our passive program. You can see some of them are so I'm trying to figure out where I can hold it where you can see it. Some of them are so engorged. They're several times bigger than how they started out.
Yikes.
So this was 37 ticks off one dog in one day.
Wow. If Luke says "ooh" in the comments, and I want to say, if anyone wants to say "ooh" again, then Google moose and ticks. If you want to say "ooh," there are some really wild pictures of just moose covered in ticks. The poor things.
I feel so sorry for them. They have a name for that phenomenon because it's so dramatic. They call them ghost moose because they've been so parasitized by ticks. They've lost so much blood, and then to try and relieve the itching and to get the ticks off, they scratch up against trees, and then it tears off their fur and their hair. So then they wind up having bald patches. And I've heard it described as being so bad that these moose, when they lie down in the snow and then they get up again, they leave just a bloody print where their body was laying. And it's one particular species that's infesting them. It's called the winter tick, Dermacentor albopictus. And it can also get on deer. So where I live in Delaware, we definitely don't have moose, but we have lots of deer. And the deer are not as impacted by the winter tick, which has been attributed to them being better groomers. So they can just remove them before they get that bad. So I guess maybe it's because the moose are so big and the ticks are so small, they just can't quite get at them. I don't know. I'm not a moose expert.
Yeah, they need. If only there were primates in North America, they could team up and help.
Right.
Them.
Like the oxpecker birds in Africa that sit on the Cape Buffalo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It actually makes me also think of a couple of years ago, there was here, I'll go like this so people, Mika's still here with us on the broadcast. Representative Pet. A couple of years ago, there was an article about how in New Jersey there were these invasive ticks, which I guess kind of leads me. Oh, so we've reached. Let me just acknowledge that we've reached 10 things, and we've already been going for an hour and a little over an hour with you now, Ashley. So I don't know what your schedule is like. But if you have a little, okay, awesome, yay. So yeah, now we're to the open floor. If you guys have other questions about ticks you guys want to put in the chat for Ashley, go ahead. I have a couple questions. One, I have a question about that article that was about these invasive ticks that are known to, I don't forget what the word is, but the word when they just drink all the blood basically of a livestock animal.
Yeah.
Will you write it in the chat? Write that word in the chat for us.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Oh, David is not saying we are primates. It's our job, OMG, to go groom the ticks off the moose. Okay.
Yeah, so there's that species you mentioned. They're so interesting and also probably like really bad news. If not for humans directly, they're going to be like really bad news for livestock, like for the cattle and dairy industry. So so this new tick species in the US, it's the Asian Longhorn tick, and probably the people tuning in from Australia already know about it because it's native to Eastern Asia, but it has already invaded Australia and several Pacific islands, and it's been there for a long time, like over 100 years, so it's pretty well established. But in the United States, it was first found in New Jersey in 2017. This, I want to say it was a sheep in New Jersey in Hunterdon County, and it had never been out of the county before, and it was just totally infested with these ticks. So they had, of course, been locally acquired. And at first glance, they look a lot like a native species we have called the rabbit tick. They belong to the same genus, and it's quite difficult to tell them apart, especially if you don't have a microscope. But yeah, they noticed in this instance in 2017 that it was a new species, and then everyone was kind of on the alert to see where else it would turn up. And by now it's turned up in 15 different states. And so there's like, it's like a good news, bad news situation. Some good news is it doesn't seem to be vectoring any human pathogens in North America. So there's a study showing that it's not a good vector for Lyme disease. And also, it just doesn't really seem to go after people too much. Its preferred hosts are ungulates, so it really likes deer and livestock. There have been some reports of it feeding on people, though. The good news is it's not a big human biter. It doesn't seem to be vectoring any pathogens in people. Now, the bad news is, so something really interesting about its life history is that it's a parthenogenetic species. So all of these invasive populations in Australia and in North America, they're entirely female. So the females can lay viable eggs without ever having mated. And there are some other tick species that can do that too. But the scary thing is, it takes just one tick potentially to start a new population. And there's been some habitat modeling that shows that there are huge swaths of North America that are not yet invaded by this species that could be, because they would be suitable habitat for it based on its temperature range that it can tolerate and its humidity range that it can tolerate. So, it's poised to keep spreading and, keep reproducing even though it's not mating. So really interesting tick, and it's especially bad news for cattle. It has been found to be carrying a cow pathogen. It causes something called tyleriosis in cattle. And it can also just reach these like dense infestations, like you said, where it can basically just, maybe not exsanguinate to the point of outright death, but like they can imbibe so much blood that the cattle will be anemic. Maybe they're not able to produce milk anymore, or they're not able to, there's reports of like spontaneous abortions in cattle that have really infested with this tick. So all kinds of problems for cattle with this species.
Yeah, I'm also concerned, since you mentioned ungulates, for the American pronghorn, which is out west as well.
Yeah, I hadn't considered that, because so far I think the farthest west it's gotten is, I want to say Arkansas, but I'm pretty sure Arkansas.
Okay.
In this vial of in this box of vials I have from ticks submitted from the passive surveillance vet program, I do have several of these are Asian longhorn ticks. So the most common species that we've seen so far this year on pets is the dog tick, the American dog tick, but then the second most common is actually the Asian longhorn tick. So it's feeding on a lot of dogs in Delaware.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so it's that's an interesting point about the pronghorn. What we can expect is that as cattle are moved around and other livestock are moved around, and even as people and their pets are moving around the country, we have to consider the possibility that this tick could be moving around with them.
I wonder if people might develop some sort of genetic thing like they did with the mosquitoes down in Florida, like a killer gene to enter into the population. But
Oh, cool.
yeah, kind of along that note, I suppose. David, well, we have two questions here. Luke is asking, are ticks squishable or crunchy? And then after that, David was asking, do ticks do something useful for the environment? Actually, can I answer Luke's a little bit and then you can answer it too? But I just wanted to say that once upon a time on the bug scope, many a year ago, I fed a tick to my Venus flytrap. And it shut because we triggered the right hairs that it shut on the tick, but then it ended up spitting the tick out. I think the tick it was too tough.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway.
So they can become squishy if you've got like one of those females that gets like so engorged with blood. And it's, the soft part of their body that's not as protected. And, I've had people send me ticks through the mail, and sometimes it gets really gross if they tried sending me like a really plump tick, and then during the shipping, it got...
Oh, no.
Usually it's inside a Ziploc bag or something, so it's not too big a mess. But in general, no, like it's really hard to squish a tick. And if someone tells me like, oh, I had a tick on me, but I squished it, I'm usually like skeptical that it was really a tick. I'm like, maybe they had some other bug on them that they just thought was a tick.
Yeah. So then, wait, was David Dellinger saying heck yeah, New Jersey because of the arrival of the invasive tick? I think. Anyway.
Hi, Dave was in my medical entomology class years ago at University of Delaware. Nice. He's an awesome medical entomologist for the military now.
Cool. Good to have you here, Dave. And then David Dunn was asking, do ticks do something useful for the environment?
Okay, so this is a tricky question.
Yeah.
I don't have like a very firm like yes answer. We do know of a lot of different things that eat them, but I don't know of wildlife that subsists on them like heavily to the point where if ticks were eradicated, they would have nothing to eat. But I do consider myself like a conservationist, and I really firmly believe in this concept of, sometimes we don't know what's useful about a species until it's too late. So, if we did eradicate them, there might be some like unforeseen repercussions that we didn't consider. And, maybe we'll just really be like shooting ourselves in the foot. But what I will say is like the tick numbers that we're seeing in some places today, they're not natural. They're unnaturally high. And we have altered the landscape in ways that have really been conducive to their survival and their reproduction, and their dispersal. So we have more ticks today than we would have had historically. So I think efforts to cut down on their numbers are good, or can be ecologically sound.
Question: what are the like species numbers, like biodiversity numbers generally of ticks?
Oh.
Like what's about how many species are there in Delaware or something like that, for example?
Okay.
I have no idea.
I think worldwide there's about 800 species. That might be out of date, but I know that's what I learned at one point. In Delaware, we have 13 species. I was really excited. We found a new species here this year. So that was our number 13.
Congratulations.
And it was something we were excited about because it wasn't like a new invasive species that we have to worry about. It was one that, it's probably always been here in very low numbers, not biting people. And that's why it had never been noticed. It just kind of evaded detection until this year, because no one was looking until this year, really.
Yeah, totally.
I saw a question about what kind of cloth to use on a tick flag, and there's a lot of cloth. There's a lot of options you can use. So cotton flannel is preferred by some people because it's easier to see the ticks, because it's got like a very like fine grain. Corduroy is at the other end of the spectrum, and denim where it's a little rougher, but that makes it more resistant to, if you're dragging it over vegetation, it won't get torn as easily. So I think I prefer denim, but I also use a lot of cotton flags too.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I definitely have more questions about the tick dragging thing, but first, like questions like what, like when you do it, are you just monitoring like what's around sort of thing and the numbers?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, just
Tab.
basic surveillance. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Autumn's asking, do you think a decrease in bird populations may be a contributing factor to the increase in the number of ticks?
Possibly. I haven't considered that. Yeah, we do know that that birds can eat ticks. The main reasons that I hear are like more to do with like land use changes. And also climate changes. So as the earth is warming up, more places are becoming suitable tick habitat, and it's not being like balanced out by some places becoming too hot for ticks. That they seem to have like their upper threshold for temperatures that they can handle is, higher than ours. So they're basically, as they're climbing up into more northerly latitudes, they're also still just as common in the more southern latitudes too. Sorry, I'm speaking from like a northern hemisphere bias right now. And then, so the climate is one big part of the equation, and then land use changes have a lot to, there's a lot to do with habitat fragmentation and development. So ticks really thrive in edge habitat, and a lot of their host species thrive in edge habitat. So, edge is, think about a forest, and then as gradually there's more development and like roads bisect the forest, and towns are built up around the forest. So they like shrink the borders of the forest and get smaller and smaller. So, it becomes more fragmented and creates more edge habitat, and ticks really flourish there, and so do deer, and so do rodents. So a lot of the species that can thrive in a more fragmented, more developed landscape, that's putting us more at risk of ticks than if we still had these like intact large forests. Because if you went into the interior of a pristine forest, it wouldn't really be crawling with ticks.
Cool, thank you. Craig, wait, hold on. Craig was asking, do ticks latch on by detecting movement, or do they detect heat also?
That's a great question. And earlier I only mentioned movement, but they can also pick up on cues like heat and even carbon dioxide. And some tick species are more aggressive than others in finding a host. The Lone Star tick is considered a pretty aggressive species where, if you're just out, having a picnic and you're, sitting on a blanket in the middle of a field, if you stay there long enough, like the ticks will like hunt you down, because they'll sense your heat, and they'll sense the carbon dioxide that you're breathing out, and they will actually they'll crawl towards you. Whereas others are more like ambush, sit and wait parasites that'll wait for you to go by. So some species will use both strategies, and I think it depends maybe on like how hungry they are, how long it's been since they last fed. And I wouldn't be surprised if we find out that there's other cues too, because I don't fully understand why some people seem to be tick magnets and other people aren't. I've always been a tick magnet. And then I know some people who work outdoors, but they never get bitten. So I would love to get to the bottom of that. What makes some people more prone to being bitten?
Yeah, all of this talk also reminds me, let me see if I can get this on here, but that famous tweet that was going around recently where someone was like, did a tick write this? I'm going to see if I can screenshot it to show everybody because it was just very funny. One sec.
Yeah, I know which one you're talking about. I think like 15 people shared it to my Facebook wall.
Yeah, I keep on seeing it circulated. Here. Where is it? Desktop, screenshot. Have you guys seen it in the chat? Oh, you're about to see it if you haven't already. All right, here it is. This one here. It says, imagine being here at the love of your life. And it's an image of these really soft, cushy, wonderfully cushy looking bed sheets and pillows. And you just want to jump onto it. But then it's surrounded by all this tall grass. And so somebody added to this that a tick must have written this tweet.
Very romantic.
Yeah. Cool. All right. We're reaching about an hour and a half now, so I think we'll wrap it up. Do you have any last things you want people to know about ticks? Oh, I have a question for you actually, Ashley. So on my Instagram, I made a poll that was ticks, love them or hate them? And so we got about 17 people who said love them. And one of them was confirmed to be an accident that they clicked love them. And then we have 104 hate thems and one person who messaged me saying neutral.
I'm impressed there were that many love thems.
Yeah. The neutral completely voluntarily.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask what you pick. If you voted in this, what would you pick?
I definitely started out as a hate them, but then the more you learn about them, they're really interesting. And then also as I've just been working with them, they're not as scary to me anymore. And if I find a tick, I'm very comfortable just picking it up with my fingers, because even though they can bite and they can give you these nasty pathogens, they take a long time to bite. They're not just going to bite you when you pick them up. So it's pretty safe to handle them, because they like to climb around for a few hours to find just the perfect place to bite you. So sometimes I've been driving and I find a tick on myself, and I can't, I'm on the road, so I can't deal with it. So I'll just kind of hold it between my fingers and drive for another 30 minutes and until I can put it somewhere where it can't get at me. And, and it won't bite me during that time. So I'm definitely not as scared of them anymore. And I find them so fascinating. I think I might have to say at this point, I love them, but it's probably closer to being neutral.
Okay, that's fair. So 2 for neutral, or caught in between. You're caught in between, love them and hate them. Maybe that's the other answer that was not included in my survey, which is both. Cool. Yeah, so everyone's Autumn saying awesome bug scope ladies. Thank you, Autumn, for being here. Thanks for your questions. Thank you, Margaret, for your questions. And you too, David. Thanks for the awards that you're sharing. And Wesley, thanks for joining us today. And Catherine. Where can people find you, Ashley?
I'm on Twitter. My handle is DE TikTok. So DE, because that's short for Delaware. And TikTok spelled like you're talking about ticks, not the TikTok that I'm too old for. You actually use TikTok.
Yeah. Cool. And so if people have follow-up questions, do you recommend that they ping you? Just maybe you can reply to this broadcast. Oops, there you are, Ashley. We lost you for one moment.
My internet is terrible.
Oh, well, you've held through for most of it, so I've experienced worse, so all good. Yeah, so if people have follow-up questions, go ahead. Maybe you can drop them here in the chat, or you can also go and tweet at Ashley at DETick TICK, talk, TALK. I put that in the chat here as well. Let me see if I can push that to the screen so people can see it present on screen. I don't know what this looks like, if it's a link. Oh, there it is. Yeah, twitter.com/DE TikTok. So, yeah, thanks so much, Ashley. This was great. I learned a lot, and we all learned a lot. I can see from the chat as well. So, if you ever want to come on again to share more, let me know. You're welcome anytime on the Bug Scope. And yeah,
Thanks for the invitation. It was
yeah,
fun.
you're welcome. Take care, and thanks everyone for joining. All right. Good night, everyone. I'm gonna put this up here.